is to discover what types of strategies youth and young adults with and without physical disabilities aged 12 to 30 use to facilitate their participation at home, school, community, and the workplace. Our two objectives for the study were to identify these participation strategies used by these two groups within the 4 settings, as well as explore similarities and differences in the type and scope of participation strategies used by youth with and without physical disabilities.
So in terms of method, a descriptive qualitative study was employed using data from a previous study that examined the initial psychometric properties of the youth, young adult participation and environment measure called the YPEM. So all the participants had to complete the YPEM, a demographic questionnaire, and a functional issues checklist that highlighted 11 areas of function, where they rated it from no problem, little problem to big problem. That was made on the REDCap Research Electronic Data Capture. As mentioned by Lindsay, all the data was collected during the COVID-19 pandemic, so from January 2020 to October 2021, and ethics approval was obtained from the Center for Interdisciplinary Research in Rehabilitation of Greater Montreal and McGill University's Institutional Review Board. So the YPEM is a self-reported questionnaire that evaluates participation and the impact of environment on participation using 31 sets of activity. So the youth had to rate their level of frequency, extent of involvement, and desire for change per activity set. And this was done across 4 settings. So home, school, community, and the workplace. And in this picture right here is an example of one of the questions that was being asked, which is, what are some things that you and your family members do that help you participate successfully in activities at home? And based on that, the individual had to report up to 3 strategies per setting, resulting in up to 12 strategies per person. So the YPEM is a tool that has shown promising initial psychometric property, such as content validity, internal consistency, and test retest reliability. And it was considered suitable for transition age youth, as it provides information that can guide youth and clinicians in establishing participation-based goals and to design intervention that facilitate participation. It can also guide stakeholders' decision in establishing facilitating youth's transition to employment, and considered as a valuable tool with relatively low burden by youth with physical and visual impairments.
As Ornella already mentioned, we also provided a demographic questionnaire that the participants completed. And in this demographic questionnaire, we accounted for parameters such as age, sex, language, level of education, vocational status, and living situation. As Ornella also mentioned, participants with physical disabilities also reported their health condition using a list of 15 health conditions, where they had to check yes or no if they had the health condition, and their functional issues using the checklist of 11 areas of function. So this is actually the picture of the checklist that we used. An example of a functional issue would be paying attention or concentrating, or another example of functional issue would be moving around. And then the functional issue was attributed to each area with a score of 1, so little problem, or 2, which is big problem. What we did is that we counted the functional issues that were reported by each participant. Then we summed up all the participants, all of their functional issues, to have a median, mean, and standard deviation of the functional issues. And we also looked at the frequency and prevalence of each one of the functional issues. So there were 105 participants who participated in this study. There were 51 participants with a physical disability and 54 participants with no physical disability. So participants with a physical disability were recruited through Quebec-based rehabilitation centers, as posted on disability advocacy groups on social media, and through national disability organizations. So basically, it was a convenient sampling method. And participants with no physical disability were recruited from Quebec through purposeful sampling. To be included in the study, participants had to be between the ages of 12 to 30. They had to be able to read and understand English or French, and they had to have a mobility restriction. This was an inclusion criteria that was specific to the youth with physical disabilities. And participants with intellectual disability or cognitive impairments were excluded. So in terms of data analysis, we content analyzed the written strategies in Microsoft Excel, and we inductively analyzed them following Elo and Kinga's process. So there were basically 3 steps that we did. We started with coding, which was 2 steps. First, we pilot coded the first 10% of the narrative responses with all team members, just so we could establish a common coding scheme. Then 2 team members independently coded youth's written strategies in 3 rounds, and they met with a 3rd team member to discuss coding. And basically, during these meetings, we discussed coding discrepancies. So what happened was that some responses alluded to inapplicability. So some of them wrote not applicable, or I did not go to school. I do not go to school, for example. So these responses were actually removed from the analysis. We didn't analyze them. And some participants also had responses that encompass multiple strategies. So for example, one of them was, I have adjustable office supplies and I listen to music while working. So you can clearly see that in this response, there are 2 distinct strategies. So we decoupled them in the analysis process. After we were done with coding, we started with creating subcategories. So this was done by another set of 2 team members, which were different than the previous ones. And we subsequently collapsed these subcategories into generic categories and main categories. And all team members actually participated in this categorization process. We met 4 times to discuss categorization, and also 2 research experts in the 3 areas of participation, which are Dana and Sadie, reviewed and validated the whole categorization process. At the end, we had generic and main categories that were generated for the 2 study groups in all settings, and we counted their frequencies.
So in terms of sample characteristics, for both groups, the sample was predominantly English-speaking female individuals who are younger than 24 years old, who lived in a major urban area with their mother and with an annual income of above $60,000. Those individuals also attended mainly school at a college education level. When it comes to the functional issues checklist, among these 51 participants with a physical disability, about 50% of the youth reported having more than 5 functional issues. And here we have the list of the top 6 frequent functional issues that they chose, which is difficulties in moving around, using their hands to activities, and etc.
So moving on to the results, I think I'm just gonna move this way. So as per the results, our first objective, like it was mentioned, was to identify the participation strategies used by youth across all settings. The inductive analysis has yielded a total of 11 main categories of strategies. They are all listed here. I'm going to define them in a moment, but so far what we know is that there are 4 that are related to utilizing intrinsic factors or qualities, and 7 that are related to more the environment. I know it's small, but I'm going to read it for you. So those are the main categories that we identified, as well as their definitions. So in terms of implementing time management methods, this category encompasses for all strategies that refers to the application of diverse strategies, like using an agenda, using a calendar to facilitate the youth's participation. Receiving social support refers to various forms of interaction within one's social circle, such as receiving support, asking for advice, help. Examples include asking help to parents, asking help to teachers at school, and more. Utilizing intrinsic factors or qualities refers to the use of individual inherent traits, strengths, and abilities, like fostering motivation through, let's say, listening to music while working, or saying yes to an advancement opportunity at work. So this is really coming from the participant. Analyzing the situation refers to assessing a task demand, understanding capabilities, the context of the activity, and informed decision-making to optimize participation. Examples include finding ways to adapt an activity that the participant prefers. So if they want to participate to a certain event, they need to analyze before, perhaps pace themselves, modify the task, or else. Cultivating an optimal physical environment refers to intentional action, strategies, and equipment to overcome obstacles that could hinder participation. Examples include wear back brace before getting into chores. So if I have to stand for a long time, sorry, that's a participant's answer that we put into this category. Or also, I dedicate a space for work, school-related activities at home. So we put all strategies related to that under this main category. Yes, next slide. It's a big table. An accommodative work environment. So it's really when at work, participants have mentioned strategies related to receiving accommodations, policies, flexible working hours, aimed at establishing an inclusive workplace culture. An accessible physical work environment, so having accessible features such as elevators, automatic doors, etc. For school, pretty similar, but at school, so again, the design that is accessible. An accommodative learning environment, so learning, we separated from physical as per strategies related to receiving accommodation, extra time to submit a paper, extra time to for completing a test, for example. And finally, available services and resources in the educational setting. So resources, counselors, psychologists, special teachers, and making use of community resources and available information. So seeking activities online, on social media, on flyers, and more. So those were the 11 main categories that we identified. So each setting had about 4 to 6 main categories identified. Just to give you an overview of what the categories look like within each setting, the most important category in each was mostly implementing time management methods for most of them, as we can observe here. For youth with disability in the school setting, it was more benefiting from an accommodative learning environment. As well, utilizing intrinsic factors and qualities also came up for youth with disability in the work setting. And in the community setting, the two most important for youth with disability was cultivating an optimal physical environment, and without disability, receiving social support. So here we identified the patterns of the strategies used for youth with and without disabilities. But now we want to explore similarities and differences between the two. So there are patterns of similarities and differences, and I'm gonna walk you through them, the ones that were observable. So in terms of similarities, we noticed that both groups, regardless of the setting, talked a lot about implementing time management methods. So to facilitate their participation in a certain activity, they would use an agenda, a calendar. Also to participate in school or work tasks, they would use note-taking, reviewing, recording, so that is more study strategies and also implementing time management methods throughout them. Receiving social support was also a recurrent theme, so communication with family members, with school staff was really highlighted for both groups across all settings. At work, both groups talked about communication with colleagues, superiors, clients, and in the community, participants talk about involving a peer in activities or events. Utilizing intrinsic factor, again, to foster motivation. That was a category that was common across groups and settings. Examples include accepting investments opportunities at work, choosing community activities based on interest, or requesting accommodations or exam taking at school. And finally, there were a lot of highlight on environment-related strategies. So benefiting from access to, let's say, technologies, to accommodations at work, at school, resources, transportation services, parking facilities, availability of activities, and so on. As for the differences that we noticed between the two groups, well, first, the school setting is the setting where we could observe the most differences between the two groups. So as you get, this is a table of the distribution of strategies for the school setting in percentages. So the bars show the frequency in percentages. In orange, it's youth with disability. In yellow, it's youth without disability. And we can see that for some categories, the bar are really higher for some. Notably for benefiting from an accommodative learning environment. This was really more prominent in the youth with disability. Also, participants with a disability mentioned more strategies related to advocacy within utilizing intrinsic factors, particularly in the school and work setting. For example, pursuing accessible services and disability-related programs, requesting extensions for paper submissions, and so on. They would share more strategies that fell under this category. Participants with a disability mentioned more strategies related to analyzing a situation, so involving pacing, adapting, modifying the task or activity in order to facilitate their participation. Participants with a disability mentioned more strategies related to benefiting from an accommodative physical, social, and institutional environment. So those strategies, we would observe them a lot. It would include benefiting from elevating platform, floor level showers, elevators, but also at the institutional level, they would talk about policies, like at school, benefiting from extra time to submit a test or submit a paper, departing class early, extending assignment deadlines, and so on.
So now let's discuss the findings. So in terms of environment-related strategies, what we found is that youth placed a special focus on the environment. And as Liliane said, 7 out of 11 categories were related to the environment. And the environment has been actually a focus in prior studies, which examined the strategies used by caregivers to promote the participation of children and youth with physical disabilities, children receiving early intervention, and children surviving critical illness. It was also interesting that youth with physical disabilities base their strategies on multiple facets of the environment. So they base it on the social, the institutional, and the physical facets of the environment. And this also is congruent with prior studies. So a scoping review by Annaly found that all ICF environmental domains had an influence on children and youth with disabilities out of school participation. And another scoping review also found that transition age youth with brain-based disabilities workplace participation was influenced by all environmental domains of the ICF. Another interesting finding that we want to discuss is the fact that the social aspect of the environment, which was represented by the category receiving social support, was recurrent in all settings for all groups. So this is also supported by a prior study. Overall, the findings related to the environment suggest that multiple aspects of the environment need to be considered when designing and tailoring interventions aimed at promoting youth participation. And these findings also support existing environment-based interventions, such as the Pathway and Resources for Engagement and Participation, or the PREP. In terms of utilizing intrinsic factors or qualities, we found that this main category displayed the most data richness, as it encompassed the most unique generic categories. And this is not surprising, considering that as children transition into adolescence, they strive to develop autonomy from their parents, and they seek self-definition. So transition age youth want to rely on their own capacities and qualities to motivate their participation. And this has also been found in previous research, in the research where parents of children and youth with physical disabilities showed that they focused on increasing their child's confidence, autonomy, and sense of freedom as a means to support participation. So another interesting generic category that came up in the utilizing intrinsic factors or qualities was making choices. So making choices actually came up as a generic category in the home and community setting for both groups, and in the workplace setting only for youth with physical disabilities. And this notion of making choices, again, implies youth's need for self-definition. So the notion of making choices is congruent with prior studies, such as studies in adolescents with cerebral palsy and studies where parents listed participation strategies. And it's important to note that making choices was related to the concept of making to the construct of preferences, which was defined as the opportunity to choose and to be able to undertake activities that are meaningful and valued in the family of participation related constructs framework. So I don't know if you guys heard about the family of participation related constructs, but basically it's a framework that comprehensively captures the characteristics and natures of participation and is now commonly used to define participation for youth and children. And basically these findings emphasize the importance of enabling youth participation in meaningful occupations by providing them with the opportunity to engage in choice making and consequently using a client-centered approach, which is at the core of all rehabilitation interventions. So another interesting finding that we found in the utilizing intrinsic factor qualities was that although youth with physical disabilities use advocacy-related strategies in the school and in the workplace setting, they did not employ such strategies in the community. And considering that children and youth with physical disabilities experience participation restrictions in community-based leisure activities, and that few policies actually exist to support participation in leisure for this population, it is extremely important for OTs to work collaboratively with youth with physical disabilities to build on their understanding of the importance and the scope of advocacy-related participation strategies so they can become agents for change.
So now moving into the school setting, as Lilian mentioned, this was the largest discrepancy that we found amongst the results and unique responses between the two groups of youth with and without disabilities, as many of the strategies employed by youth with disabilities pertain to benefiting from an accommodative learning environment. And we have seen in congruent studies that parents have commonly employed strategies in the past within their school's institutional environment that aim to prioritize their child's engagement in school-related activities. And perhaps the strategies employed by these parents at such a young age may have a long-term effect on youth with disabilities and encourage them to employ similar strategies as they grow up and continue their education. And a study actually revealed that adjustments made for tests have discernible impacts on GPA, notably emphasizing the substantial effects of extended time and revised exam materials on academic performance. And this may be a reason as to why there is such a discrepancy amongst this setting, particularly since these strategies were employed so young by parents and caregivers, and the population of youth with disabilities truly benefited from those accommodations and brought it through with them. In terms of analyzing the situation, youth with disabilities were found to implement more strategies in relation to analyzing the situation, as we mentioned, which pertains to the accessibility of an activity, planning accordingly, such as pacing, certain weather conditions, parking, and more. And results actually found used during the PrEP intervention for youth with spina bifida that OTs employed strategies such as sharing knowledge and strategies specifically on ways to engage in activities while considering accessibility and ways to adapt the environment and activities. It was actually proven to improve their participation for youth with disabilities within their communities. And these findings only further emphasize the complexity of participation for those with disabilities and the need to consider a broad range of factors, including not only assessing an activity, but truly responding to the capabilities and the demands of the activity. And lastly, working on body functions or structures was also a common topic that came up. So within the home, school, and community settings, youth with physical disabilities do not consider working on body functions or structures, such as doing upper body exercises, as a strategy to promote participation. It is plausible that youth find environment-related strategies as more applicable and more beneficial and practical as opposed to working on body functions, especially considering that youth with physical disabilities place an emphasis on those environment-related strategies, as I mentioned priorly. And of course, further research is required in this domain. In terms of the unique findings that came from this, access to supports within the school's physical environment was actually only seen within youth without disabilities. So strategies such as using library services to study with peers, using gym during free time were only seen for youth without disabilities. Strategies mentioned within this category, it's important to note all involved a level of autonomy that motivated the youth without disabilities to seek and access school resources that were available to them without the need for social supports. This may infer that youth with disabilities potentially lack that level of autonomy and motivation to seek out added resources without that sort of push and motivation from caregivers or parents or teachers. And it's also been seen in previous research that youth with disabilities have lower ratings in observed participation in school activities and self-rated autonomy.
So in terms of limitations, there's two factors that impact the generalizability of the findings. The first being the use of a convenient sampling method generated from one geographical location, and the second being the exclusion of individuals with cognitive impairments and intellectual disability. The responses were also really context-based because they were collected during the COVID pandemic. Moreover, the participant strategies are also described really briefly in the PEM, which may have limited our understanding of the strategies. Therefore, future studies should use the PEM along with a semi-structured interview with the youth themselves to allow them to expand on their strategies. And lastly, the data collection method of the study also did not allow us to account for the effectiveness of the participation strategies. So future studies may consider asking youth to rank their participation strategies in terms of effectiveness. So in conclusion, the study brings knowledge on the participation strategies employed by youth with and without physical disability across the setting of home, school, community, and workplace at a transitional age. So overall, the findings emphasize the need for tailored interventions that encompasses both environment-related strategies and the empowerment of intrinsic factors to promote meaningful participation. These findings hold implication for rehab professionals, educators, policymakers, and youth themselves. Therefore, future research is needed to expand the scope to include a broader range of conditions. So as mentioned, we talked about cognitive disability and mental health issues that could help reveal variations in participation strategies among different disability groups. Which would lead us to more tailored interventions and policies to enable participation for a diverse population. And lastly, we would like to acknowledge the contribution of Professor Anabi and Sadie, who provided us their expertise and guided us throughout the entirety of the project. We also wish to acknowledge Chantal Cobial, who helped us to contribute to the logistics of this presentation. And this presentation was also made possible thanks to the Centre d'Adaptation Mackay and Aspire Lab. Thank you. Thank you.